Most people believe that money brings happiness. But did you know that nearly 60% of the world's wealthiest individuals admit to feeling empty despite their success? This is a true story of one such man, a millionaire who had everything but still wanted more. But in his endless search for pleasure, he never imagined that the person he trusted the most would take away the one thing he never valued, until it was too late. Michael, a self-made millionaire, was admired by many. To the outside world, he had a perfect life, a beautiful home, a loving wife, and a reputation for success. But behind closed doors, he was living a double life. His wife, Emily, was the definition of a devoted partner, graceful, kind, and always putting her husband first. She believed in love and marriage, even when Michael grew distant. He often claimed he had business meetings overseas, but in reality, he was spending time with someone else, Lisa, his secret lover. There was one man who knew Michael's secret but remained silent, James, the family's trusted driver. He had served the household for years, witnessing everything, yet keeping his loyalty intact. He watched as Emily waited night after night for a husband who never truly valued her. And though he kept his distance, something inside him began to stir, a feeling he never expected. James had no idea that fate was about to pull him into a dangerous game, one that would change all of their lives forever. Emily had always believed that love required patience. She convinced herself that Michael's coldness was just a phase, that one day he would return to the man she fell in love with. But deep inside, she knew something was wrong. Michael barely spoke to her anymore. When he was home, he acted irritated, as if her presence was a burden. He avoided intimacy, always blaming stress from work or important deals that required his full attention. At first, she accepted his excuses, but as the months passed, the distance between them grew unbearable. At social gatherings, Michael's wealthy friends often complimented Emily, calling her the perfect wife, elegant, kind, and patient. Some even whispered that Michael was the luckiest man to have such a devoted woman by his side. But what they didn't know was that behind her graceful smile, Emily was breaking inside. James, the quiet observer, noticed everything. He saw the way Emily's smile faded a little more each day. He saw how she sat alone on the balcony at night, staring into the empty darkness, waiting for a husband who never came home. He wanted to comfort her, but what could he say? He was just a driver, a servant in their grand household. It wasn't his place to interfere. But fate was already setting things in motion, pulling Emily and James toward a truth neither of them were prepared for. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Michael's absence became more frequent, and Emily was left to live in a house that no longer felt like a home. But in the middle of her loneliness, she found an unexpected companion, James. At first, their conversations were brief. James would politely greet her when he drove her to the market or picked her up from charity events. But over time, small talks turned into longer conversations. Emily found herself opening up about her childhood, her dreams, and the little things that made her happy. James listened, not out of duty, but because he genuinely cared. He found himself drawn to her kindness, her resilience. She was unlike anyone he had ever met, and the more time they spent together, the more he noticed the small things, how her laughter had a hint of sadness, how her eyes searched for something she couldn't find. One evening, as they sat outside in the garden, Emily sighed and said, "I sometimes wonder if love is supposed to hurt this much." James hesitated before replying, "Love isn't supposed to hurt at all." Their eyes met for a second too long, and in that moment, something shifted. Emily quickly looked away, brushing off the thought, but James couldn't ignore what was happening. He was falling for her. But how could he? She was the wife of the man he worked for, a man who, despite his flaws, gave him a job and trusted him. James pushed the feeling aside, convincing himself that nothing could ever happen. But fate had other plans, and soon the boundaries between them would blur in a way neither of them expected. It was a quiet afternoon when everything changed. Emily had asked James to drive her to a shopping mall, just like he had done countless times before. But this time, something felt different. As they walked through the aisles, James noticed how Emily's mood seemed lighter. For the first time in a long while, she was smiling, genuinely. She picked up a dress, held it against herself, and asked, "Do you think this color suits me?" James hesitated before nodding. "You look beautiful in anything, ma'am," she chuckled. "James, stop calling me ma'am. It makes me feel old." There was warmth in her voice, something James had rarely heard before. It was in that moment that he realized she wasn't just the woman he secretly admired. She was someone he wanted to protect. On the drive home, the air between them was filled with an unspoken tension. James pulled up at the entrance, stepped out, and opened the car door for Emily just as he always did. But this time, as she turned to step out, he did something he never imagined he would do. A soft, quick kiss, just at the corner of her lips. It was so brief, yet it sent shockwaves through both of them. Emily's eyes widened in shock, her breath caught in her throat. James immediately stepped back, his face unreadable, but before she could say anything, he simply whispered, "You deserve peace of mind." Then, without another word, he walked away. Emily sat there, heart racing, her mind spinning with questions she couldn't answer. Why didn't she pull away? Why did her heart ache in a way it never had before? And most of all, why was James's touch lingering in her thoughts longer than it should? She didn't know it yet, but that single moment would set off a chain of events that would change everything. That night, Emily barely slept. Her mind replayed the moment over and over. The unexpected kiss, James's words, the way her heart pounded in a way it never had with Michael. The next morning, she avoided James. She told herself it was a mistake, that it meant nothing. She was a married woman, and no matter how lonely she felt, she had to remain loyal. But deep inside, a seed of doubt had been planted. James, on the other hand, couldn't shake the guilt. He had crossed a line. He had betrayed his employer's trust, even if Michael never truly valued Emily. But more than the guilt, there was something else. Pain. He had fallen for a woman he could never have. A few days later, James finally gathered the courage to confess his feelings. He found Emily alone in the garden and spoke the words he had been holding back. "I know this is wrong, but I can't lie to myself anymore. I care about you, Emily, more than I should." Emily's heart pounded. A part of her wanted to deny it, to scold him for his foolishness, but instead she whispered, "James, I have a husband." James took a deep breath. "A husband who doesn't love you." Silence. Emily clenched her hands, fighting the emotions she didn't want to acknowledge. "I won't say another word about this," James continued, "but there's something you need to know, something I should have told you a long time ago." Emily looked at him confused. "Michael is lying to you." And just like that, Emily's world tilted. James pulled out his phone and showed her pictures. Michael with Lisa, holding her the way a man holds the woman he loves, laughing, embracing, disappearing into luxury hotels. Emily stared at the images, her hands trembling. A part of her had suspected it, but seeing it with her own eyes shattered the last piece of hope she had been clinging to. Tears burned at the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "I need proof," she whispered, her voice barely steady. James nodded. "Then let's get it." Neither of them realized it yet, but this decision would set them on a dangerous path, one that could destroy them both. Emily's hands were cold as she gripped the edges of her dress. The truth was staring her in the face, yet she wasn't ready to believe it. Could the man she had devoted her life to truly be living a double life? James had given her evidence, photos, locations, dates, but she needed to see it with her own eyes. "I want to catch him myself," she said firmly. James hesitated. He knew this could break her, but he also knew she deserved the truth. 2 nights later, Michael called James as usual. "Get the car ready. I have a business trip." Emily and James exchanged a knowing glance, but this time things would be different. James carefully helped Emily hide in the car's boot before picking Michael up. It was a risky plan, but Emily was determined. She held her breath as the car rolled through the streets, her heart pounding against her chest. After a long drive, the car stopped in front of a luxury house, a place Emily had never seen before. She waited until Michael got out, then James discreetly opened the boot, helping her sneak out. They hid behind a nearby tree, watching. The front door swung open, and Lisa appeared, dressed in a silk nightgown, her arms wide open. "I missed you," she purred. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Then Michael pulled Lisa into his arms and kissed her, passionately, without hesitation, without guilt, without shame. Emily's world collapsed. But the final blow came when Michael spoke. "You're the only woman I've ever truly loved," he whispered, stroking Lisa's cheek. "Emily means nothing to me." The words sliced through Emily like a dagger. Her legs gave out, and before she could stop herself, she collapsed to the ground. James barely caught her in time. Michael and Lisa turned at the noise. "Who's there?" Michael barked, stepping forward. James didn't wait. He scooped Emily into his arms, rushed to the car, and sped off. Emily drifted in and out of consciousness, her heart shattered beyond repair. She had given everything to Michael, and in return, he had thrown her away like she was nothing. But what Michael didn't know was that he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. James drove as fast as he could, his hands gripping the wheel tightly. Emily lay in the back seat, her face pale, her breathing unsteady. She hadn't said a word since they left. She was conscious, but lifeless, her spirit completely shattered. He rushed her to a small clinic where the doctor assured him she had only fainted from emotional shock. "She needs rest," the doctor said, "and someone to take care of her." James nodded. "I'll stay with her." Hours passed before Emily finally opened her eyes. She stared at the ceiling, her expression empty. The woman who once radiated kindness and patience was gone. What remained was a woman betrayed, humiliated, and utterly broken. James sat beside her, waiting, not forcing her to speak. When she finally did, her voice was hollow. "He never loved me." James's jaw tightened. "He didn't deserve you." Emily turned her head slowly, looking at him for the first time. There was something different in her eyes now. No more illusions, no more denial. "What do I do now?" she whispered. James took a deep breath. He had been waiting for this moment, not because he wanted to take advantage of her pain, but because he wanted her to see what had been right in front of her all along. "You move on." Emily let out a weak, bitter laugh. "Move on? With what? I have nothing, James." He reached for her hand, his touch gentle but firm. "You have yourself, and I swear, as long as I'm alive, you'll never be alone." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes, but this time they weren't just tears of sorrow. Somewhere beneath the pain, something else was forming. Strength. Michael had destroyed the woman she once was, but he had no idea that he had just created someone even stronger. The days that followed were quiet, but heavy. Emily barely spoke, but something in her had changed. She no longer waited for Michael's calls. She no longer wondered if he would come home. She knew the truth now. Her marriage had been a lie, and for the first time in years, she wasn't clinging to false hope. James stayed by her side, not pushing her to talk, not forcing her to smile, just being there. And somehow that was enough. One evening, as they sat outside watching the sunset, Emily broke the silence. "I don't want to be weak anymore." James turned to her, his heart racing. "You were never weak, Emily." She shook her head. "I let him break me. I let him take everything from me, but not anymore." James saw something different in her eyes now, a quiet determination, a strength that had been buried beneath years of pain. "What do you want to do?" he asked. Emily exhaled slowly. "Start over. Build something for myself. Something real." James smiled. "Then let's do it." And so they did. With James's savings and Emily's determination, they started a small business, a modest cafe in a quiet part of town. Emily poured her heart into it, and slowly, she began to heal. At first, their relationship remained unspoken. James never crossed the line again, and Emily needed time to rediscover herself. But every moment they spent together, every smile they shared, built something stronger than either of them had expected. One night, as they closed the cafe, Emily turned to James and asked, "Why did you stay?" James looked at her, his eyes filled with sincerity. "Because I love you." Silence. Emily's heart pounded. She had spent so long waiting for love to come from a man who never valued her. And yet here was someone who had been there all along. She took a deep breath, then reached for his hand. "I think I'm finally ready to love again." And just like that, Emily chose something she had never chosen before: happiness. The night was quiet, the air warm with a gentle breeze. Emily and James stood outside the cafe, the glow of the streetlights casting soft shadows on their faces. For the first time in years, Emily felt something she had forgotten: peace. James watched her, mesmerized by the way the light danced in her eyes. She wasn't just beautiful. She was free. No longer the woman trapped in a loveless marriage, no longer waiting for a man who never truly saw her. As she turned to him, a smile curved her lips, soft but full of meaning. "I never thought I'd feel like this again." James took a step closer, his fingers lightly brushing against hers. "Like what?" She hesitated, then met his gaze. "Like I belong somewhere. Like I'm safe." James exhaled, his heart pounding. "You'll always be safe with me." Their fingers intertwined, a silent promise passing between them. No rush, no pressure, just the quiet understanding of two souls who had found each other in the ruins of heartbreak. And as the world faded around them, Emily did something she never thought she would do again. She closed her eyes and leaned in. The kiss was slow, unhurried, filled with every unspoken word between them. It wasn't the desperate touch of forbidden love. It was something deeper, something real. A love that had grown in stolen moments, in gentle conversations, in the unwavering loyalty of a man who had never left her side. When they finally pulled away, James rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Emily." A tear slipped down her cheek, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming realization that she had finally found what she had been searching for all along. "And I love you." Meanwhile, far away in a luxury penthouse, Michael sat alone, staring at the empty glass in his hand. Lisa had taken everything: his money, his business, his reputation. The woman he had chosen over Emily had used him, drained him, and discarded him the moment his fortune ran dry. Now, with nothing left but regret, he finally understood what he had lost. But it was too late. Emily had already moved on, and for the first time, she was truly happy. Years passed, but Emily never looked back. She had built a life she never thought possible, a life filled with love, peace, and purpose. The small cafe she and James had started grew into something bigger. With their hard work and unwavering support for each other, they expanded it into a thriving business. It became more than just a cafe. It was a place filled with warmth, laughter, and the scent of fresh baked pastries that always seemed to bring people together. One evening, as Emily stood behind the counter, watching customers enjoy the cozy atmosphere they had created, James walked up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "Busy night," he murmured, pressing a soft kiss to her temple. Emily smiled, leaning into him. "Just the way I like it." James turned her around gently, looking deep into her eyes. "You know, I still wake up every morning grateful that you chose me." Emily reached up, tracing his jawline with her fingertips. "I didn't just choose you, James. My heart always belonged to you. I just didn't realize it back then." James pulled her closer, brushing a kiss against her lips. "Then I guess I'm the luckiest man alive." Outside, the stars twinkled softly in the night sky. Their love, built from pain and healing, had blossomed into something unshakable. Meanwhile, in a small rented apartment on the other side of town, Michael sat in darkness. His wealth was gone. His name meant nothing, and Lisa had left him for a younger, richer man. He had tried to reach out to Emily once, hoping for forgiveness, hoping she would take him back. But when he saw her with James, happy, laughing, full of life, He knew he had lost the greatest treasure he ever had, and this time there was no getting it back. As James and Emily stood together, hands entwined, they knew one thing for certain. True love wasn't about money, status, or power. It was about kindness, loyalty, and the courage to walk away from pain and embrace happiness. And for the rest of their lives, they did just that, together. What do you think about this story? Have you ever seen a situation like this in real life? Let's talk in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another powerful story. Your support helps us bring more real-life stories to light. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.